things to talk to you about directly in terms of how does today's public safety predicament impact our communities from Seattle all the way to the east side, all the way to North Bend, all the way to the south. We have some subject matter experts that want to inform you of the dire situation we find ourselves in with staffing, the lack of police response, and its impact with putting offenders that we arrest in jail and how they're released into the public to reoffend, creating more victims, and the victims should be the focal point of this post-defunding nonsense that we're living in. Once we're done with our opening comments, then I'm going to turn it over to candidate for King County Prosecuting Attorney, the current mayor of the Federal Way City down south, Jim Farrell, to address you in terms of his view of the predicament we find ourselves in when we talk about the broad scope of public safety. First, I want to hand it off to Dennis Folk, and he's going to address you directly.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome. Like many of you reported over the last several months, King County is in a crisis. And we're looking at ways that we could address the concerns that face us, not only in the jail, but also the public. So we reached out to the Sheriff's Union and the Seattle Police Officers Union to talk to them and how we could work together to bring awareness to this. I mean, as you guys know, we're facing a staffing crisis in our jail system right now. We are close to 100 vacancies. King County is actively recruiting. We appreciate the fact that they brought in hiring bonuses and retention bonuses, but more needs to be done. Our jail was recently closed overnight for booking, and for about 12 hours they couldn't put people into jail because of it. And inside the jails, it's gone to pretty much emergency staffing. I have officers that are getting mandated to work 16-hour shifts, 3-4 days a week in a row, and what it boils down to is the inmates in our custody are also suffering. We see inmates not getting access to programs, not getting access to their attorneys, delays getting to trial, and so these inmates are being affected by this as well. So we want to bring awareness to this and then try to find some resolutions on how we can make things better, not only for the community that we serve, but even those that we're tasked to care for. So that's very important to us. We'll turn it over to Mike.
I just want to add to what Dennis said was it affects us also in law enforcement, not only the sheriff's office, but all the agencies in the area when we can't book into jail. Those officers are taken off the streets, stuck with an inmate in their car, in the Sally Port, or even on the street outside the jail, and that takes those officers off the streets answering those 911 calls, causing response times to go through the roof. So it's affecting everything, and it's as Dennis said, it's staffing. It's affecting everyone. The sheriff's offices are down 100 plus officers. King County is trying really hard to hire incentives and everything like that. They're doing the best they possibly can, but with all the stuff that's been going on over the last 2 years, no one really wants to do this job anymore. And the old guard is all retiring, and it's leaving a lot of holes. And those holes are really affecting even response times in the citizens of King County and the state. So that's all I have to add at this time.
Thanks, Dennis and Mike. And to follow up from the labor union heads, the Seattle police have lost close to 500 people in the past 2 years. We release weekly a public safety index to engage the public, to inform them of how dire our staffing situation is. We're not recruiting to the level that we should be recruiting. We need to retain our current people. And I'm fearful that if we lose more people, 911 response times will continue to spike, which will degrade our public safety predicament even in a worse way. We're looking for solutions. That's why it's historic that these three labor unions have gotten together to form this coalition to engage with the reasonable communities across our King County region to amplify how serious this is. We're losing officers at an alarming rate. In Seattle, we've lost 122 this year alone. we're projecting to lose about 180 at the close of this year. Folks, this isn't good. And it's time our constituents are told the truth about staffing. And like Dennis said, and like Manny said, we can't book people into jail. So where do you take people that victimize our communities? It's time we put the focus on the criminals and start building up law enforcement as a profession that is proud, that professionally serves our communities, which we do on a daily basis throughout this county. We're proud to be police officers. We're proud to represent the men and women that belong to our organizations. And we feel that now is the time to remove politics out of public safety and voice support for an individual who sees what is occurring in our community, in our counties, in our cities, who has the acumen to be here to lead our county through this criminal windfall that we're seeing embrace our communities. That person's Jim Farrell. I'd like to introduce Jim. Please come to the mic.
Thank you, Mike. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think there is truly a crisis in our community, in our region, with criminal justice. I'll tell you that really one of the things that people are not really focusing on, or it's not really out there as much, is this tremendous backlog of 5,000 felony cases, of which over 180 are homicides, over 500 sexual assault cases. These cases are awaiting trial. They're stuck in this system, and there is no discernible plan moving forward. That is a failure of justice, and really a failure to serve the people that are the victims of these crimes and the families. But we've got really, I think the entire criminal justice system needs a reset in how we're approaching these. I was just actually in Belltown 2 weeks ago, just in about this time of day. And it was really an unacceptable situation in which business owners are assaulted. They've got, really a breakdown of the social order, and really no help in regard to the assistance in order to be able to run their business and have the people that live there, work there, and want to utilize those businesses. So I think we've got on a multi-front issue, whether it's staffing. The staffing at the King County Corrections Facility is absolutely unacceptable. You've got people in that jail, the jailers, that are literally having to sleep in those cells in between shifts because they can't get home because they're so exhausted. There are at least over 100 officers down. Then you've got officers that respond to calls that just do not have the manpower they need. But more importantly, we've got really, I would say that the prosecutor's office is the hinge point of the entire system, and we've got a breakdown in how we're handling these cases. There's the Restorative Community Pathway program that has been launched with serious felonies that are being referred to private organizations with no case number, no judge, no check back, no accountability whatsoever. And soon, this fall, they're going to launch RCP for adults. That does not meet community expectations. And so I think we've got a real crisis in our region. We need to address it with a realistic point, but with a sense of urgency. We need to operate with a sense of urgency to make sure that we're addressing the public safety that everybody in this community rightfully deserves and should expect. So I would love to take any questions if you have any. And
so will you, in layman's terms,
Yeah.
talk about restorative justice?
We're back.
You've got people who've committed serious crimes, and these
Right.
are essentially diversion programs that
Yeah.
will prevent them from spending any time behind bars.
Well, and here's the thing. This RCP is not a diversion program. It's a look in the other way program. They do not get a case number, no check back, no judge, nothing. That is not what they have instituted, with no notice to any city whatsoever and no ability to change this. That's not a diversion program. I was a prosecutor for 19 years. And so what you need is, you absolutely have to have diversion programs and restorative programs, but they've got to have the hallmarks of transparency, accountability. $3 million is being spent per year for these groups, and we have no idea. We're not being told exactly what these programs are. So I believe in restorative programs, as do all of the leaders in South King County and in King County as well. But you've got to have a check back. You got to know, did the person show up? Did they commit another criminal law violation? And it's not appropriate for those programs are not acceptable for bringing a gun to school, commercial burglary, residential burglary, felony assault, robbery. Those are not appropriate cases in which you never see the inside of a courtroom, don't get a case number, don't see a judge. So I believe in restorative programs, but not looking the other way.
What's like a 30-day, 90-day, 120-day plan? Where do we go? I mean, it sounds great, but what are the first steps?
Okay, the first thing that absolutely has to happen is, like I said, there is no plan for that 5,000 case backlog. That's a crisis. What we'll need to do is form a specialized unit in the prosecutor's office to triage those cases. The homicides, the sexual assaults, the serious violent cases, they need to go through. This is really a capacity issue. If you will, if you just think of it like a capacity issue, whether it's a hose or whatever it is, you have to increase the capacity to push these cases through because there's only a certain number of judges. That means you've got to hire pro tem judges and push these cases through, at least in the short term, until you get that down. You'll have to also do a triage of those cases and figure out where you're at on the seriousness level. But that's got to be done right away. Then what we've got to do is make sure that we get those cases down, work that down, and then we've got to revisit how we're filing cases in King County, because right now the mayors in King County are incredibly concerned about the filing and disposition standards, which cases are being filed, which are not. A lot of assaults against officers just routinely are not being prosecuted. They won't prosecute them. And the current prosecutor has essentially created a specialized standard for the prosecution of assaults against officers. And so, whether it's burglary, robbery, car theft, these are really crimes really that really erode the public's trust and our community.
Mayor Farrell, this might be a question for Mr. Sullivan.
Yeah.
Staffing levels is something that was brought up for Seattle Police.
Right.
100 police officers so far this year. We have another looming staffing shortage with retirements.
Right.
You can address that, or Mr. Sullivan, and what that means for police safety in Seattle.
Well, let me say this. I actually was at the King County, good to see you, Dennis. I was actually when I was seeking the endorsement of the King County Corrections Facility, and the new director showed up there, which I thought was great that the new director showed up at their guild meeting. They were talking about a number of these issues. They have to move with a sense of urgency and fill those positions, and that's really where they've got to have a plan to fill those vacancies up. In the city of Federal Way, we've actually added quite a number of officers to get us that staffing level, but you've really got to go into a crash course and get those positions filled as soon as possible. Because you can't have a situation, if you don't have the requisite staffing, you have a situation like you have in Belltown or in Ballard or in Magnolia, where the police just don't have the bandwidth to respond. And so that's what I would say.
Mr. Sullivan, could you perhaps talk about what the numbers look like for the coming year for retirements?
Sure, the coming year, we have 350 people within the Seattle Police Department that are eligible to retire right now. And so if you do the math, where we've lost close to 500 people in 2 years, 122 this year alone, let's say we lose 100 this year, or even 200 to retirement. I don't know if we have anybody left to answer that 911 call, and that's not being hyperbolic. That's a reality. Right now we have just a little over 400 people to answer 911 calls at the patrol level. We have just above 850 deployable officers and detectives that are still employed. If you remove 350, you're decimating our ability to answer 911 calls. And then more importantly, at the same level, how do you investigate crimes? And it's one thing, we'll do our job and arrest offenders. We do this professionally on a daily basis. And when we do that, the risk that incurs on us, but also in the community, we're having a tough time putting them in jail. Just imagine if we lose 300 people now, the police department would be decimated, absolutely decimated. And I don't know if King County Sheriff's Office could absorb that. This is why we're coming together and treating this as serious as this is. The viable, reasonable, moderate candidate that understands this with 19 years experience as a prosecutor, who won't put politics into public safety, He'll actually work for the citizens of this county and in this city to rectify our criminal predicament. We have to get serious here. And it's about time that this coalition is formed. This is how serious we're taking this. And if somebody else gets a hold of that office, we will continue to be impacted to a negative degree with crime and low staffing. Politics will again be forefront in everyone's public safety. And to me, that's a disservice to our county. Jim Farrell's the only answer.
What's the breakdown between the number of people being booked into jail that are misdemeanors versus felons that you're not able to book?
So since the onset of COVID, we've had booking restrictions in place. Right now, all felonies are being booked. Then anything that's a mandatory arrest, like a domestic violence offense or DUI, and then weapons violations. They also have the ability to call the jail and ask for a special permission to book somebody. So they can call the on-duty sergeant or the on-duty shift commander and say, hey, can I get an exception to your booking restriction? And those things are happening at times.
So you're not kicking people who are being charged with felonies?
Not right now, no.
And Mr. Farrell?
Yes.
Prosecutor's office is talking about felony charges. That's what you guys handle.
That's right.
They're booking all of their felons. So it's not felons that are making it onto the street. These are people who are handled by city attorneys, city prosecutors, isn't that correct?
Well, actually, what's happening is a lot of these folks get booked, but they're immediately released. We've had a situation where we've had very serious cases. Actually, when I was in Belltown just last week, there was a store owner who was struck in the top of the head with an axe, a hatchet. And yes, he was booked for that felony assault second degree, but he was out by within 72 hours. And so then I had to, once I met those folks down there, and I said, why in the world was this person released? And that really was.
By a judge, right?
Well, because they didn't get the case in time to get it filed. So the filer's office at the King County Prosecutor's office needed to work with Seattle Police and say, hey, our filing deadline is up in 72 hours. You need to walk this case in, because they had originally asked for, I think, $150,000 in bail. That was a serious case. I saw the pictures.
You can still get a felony warrant though and go out and arrest them.
They don't do that though, because at that point, what happened was a judge had, at first appearance, had given $10,000 bail. The prosecutor's office respected that original decision, and they're just going to let him walk in 2 weeks for his first appearance. So they did charge it eventually after about a week or two.
When you're talking about bringing more judges in, you don't
Yeah.
really have anything to do with hiring pro temp judges.
Yeah, actually, here's the thing right now, is we've got a King County prosecutor who's really, in my opinion, just abdicated this public role of saying we need to make sure that we've got enough judicial positions, temporary pro tem judges, to be able to come in and handle this bandwidth issue. And the prosecutor's office needs to be on the 12th floor of the courthouse asking for additional funding and say, we absolutely have to have this.
So you know that Satterberg hasn't done that?
Yeah, it has not happened. It has not happened publicly. I have not heard a word about it. He has not, and the problem is that the same thing needed to happen in Olympia when they passed it down in Olympia, essentially the no pursuit laws and the de facto legalization of drugs, which is fueling violence. You've got, as a mayor of a city now, you've got the inability of the police officers to pursue people for crimes in which they have reasonable suspicion, but not full probable cause. It's just outrageous. So,
I have a question for the
yeah.
union leaders.
Yeah.
Mike? Question for the three union leaders. Usually when the unions form a coalition, they try out to prove a point. Are you planning any job actions to prove your point?
It's illegal for us to strike. In fact, it's against city charter, it's against our contract, and it's against federal law. So we won't even entertain anything like that.
I'm not talking
What we're
about
doing
strikes.
now, what we're doing now is, to answer to your question, this is us working collaboratively to highlight how serious the situation is in terms of staffing, how it's impacting the jail, how it's impacting our community when we can't book people into jail. What do you do with those offenders? We should also look at the screening process that occurs at the jail as well. These offenders are smart. They know how to play the game. And so when they go to the booking counter and the health practitioner asks them a series of questions that are very vague and broad. The offenders know if they answer it a certain way, they're going to be not booked into jail, put up in the hospital for police officers to sit on them for 6 to 8 hours, and we can't do that. We don't have the staffing to do that, so what ends up happening? We have to let them go. And this is bigger picture than just police on the street. These are levels of what I call as post-defunding activism to fundamentally change the criminal justice system, where they're impeding our ability to hold offenders accountable at the basic necessity of booking them into jail. Then what happens when they're in that facility and then post being released from that facility? I hope that answers your question.
It doesn't, so, because I'm looking for what collectively as a union, what leverage you could use to prove your point to the lawmakers and the citizens collectively other than just talk about what the problem is.
Absolutely. So the coalition that we're going to do is a broad engagement with our communities to engage, most like we did with StopDefunding.com, where we had over 200,000 signatures to push back against defunding. It's the same concept, and we're almost ready to release that to the community, more directly to answer your question, where the King County community will have the opportunity to weigh in with this campaign to influence our political elected leaders to highlight how serious the staffing and public safety crisis we find ourselves in truly is. And hopefully with that campaign, we can engage the community, remove control from the small activist loud groups that put politics before public safety to the detriment of all. It's time the reasonable citizens, the overwhelming majority, the people that will elect Jim into office, wake up and understand how serious this is. So it's twofold. A campaign to engage the communities, but also engage with you, local media, that have the platforms to put out a moderate, reasonable message that is neutral, that talks truth to what's actually occurring in our communities.
Mike, can you give me an idea of what response times
Go ahead.
are?
Hold on a second, Mike. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
So kind of piggyback on that question, I think that all of us, we are members of this community, so we're living all of the issues. So it's not new to us what you're describing. I think what draws us here today is you said you were planning to lay out a direct course of action.
Yeah,
Direct action.
the direct course of action is the three of these unions at a first time in history getting together to highlight the public safety crisis, engaging in a campaign, much like we did with engagement in the community of over 200,000 signatures, the power of our communities to galvanize on public safety issues. This is the start of this campaign. This is what we're rolling out. This is the plan. And together with our support of Jim Farrell, King County Prosecuting Attorney, that plan will be finalized, and we hope the communities will understand how serious this is and actually have the capacity via the campaign to engage with us and local leaders to voice their positions.
So your course of action is a candidate endorsement.
I don't understand your question.
I do, yeah.
Go ahead.
May I? As I said before, I think actually this position at the King County Prosecutor's Office, the King County Prosecutor, is the hinge point of the entire system. It's the hinge point in regard to how are cases filed, how do you gauge release, how are you coordinating with the other law enforcement agencies, how are you advocating down in Olympia. It's the hinge point for the entire system. And the problem is there's been really just a lack of leadership and a lack of sense of urgency in regard to getting these cases filed, getting them held, and being an advocate. When I was at that position, when I was at that meeting with the jail officers, it seemed to me that what they needed was an advocate. The police need an advocate. The jail officers need an advocate. The community needs an advocate to say these things should not be happening. You should not have people being released for serious offenses and not charged for serious offenses. And you need leadership to make sure that the 5,000 cases that are sitting in a drawer don't languish. I mean, that's just an absolute failure of the system, and it fails everybody in this community. So the answer is yes. One person, that position, and the office that it occupies is really the hinge point of the entire thing.
So there is still a lot of mandatory overtime happening. The county did just implement an MOA where we could volunteer and get additional pay. So that's relieved a little bit of it, but there is still mandatory overtime happening because we're 100 positions down. So until we get our staffing back up to what we think, or what the budgeted positions are, 505, things won't improve. But we think that we're grossly understaffed at 505. The county's agreed to do a staffing study to bring an outside consultant in to look at what our numbers should be. We're thinking we should be upwards of 600 officers. But until that's done, you know, mandatory overtime's happening because even though I volunteer, which is great to get extra pay, I'm still time away from my family. And then kind of touch base on the joint effort we're doing. Pierce County and Snohomish County unions that I work with wanted to be here today to voice, you know, their issues happened up in their counties, but unfortunately they can't. But they've agreed to work with this, with us on this as well. So this is not just King County. This is affecting both Pierce and Snow County as well.
In November, you guys were at crisis.
Yeah. So right now, we are losing officers faster than we can hire them. We have about 100 vacancies, so we're sitting right around 400 officers. We have over 100 at retirement age right now that could at any point say, I'm done, and many have, where they're like, I can't keep doing this, I'm just gonna retire. And then we have to do something to keep the people in place that we have. We did a retention bonus of 4,000, but that expires in April. So what happens in April when those people can now just leave? So we have to ramp up our hiring. We need to beef up our HR department. But, you know, until we get the numbers up and get people trained, because even if I hire 100 today, those officers can't work solo by themselves for at least 6 months due to all the training that they need to go through.
How many people have been turned away from the jail not being welcome? Give me like a sense of how often that's happening.
I don't have actual numbers on that. Like Mike had mentioned, there are people that come in that will claim medical conditions like swallow narcotics or been a victim of something, and that we can't accept them in the jail. So now those officers are tasked to guard those inmates at the hospital. But like Mike mentioned, that they can't guard them at the hospital for 6 or 8 hours. So they're just, charges filed through the prosecutor at a later day. And that's what's creating this big caseload right now to where they can't guard them. They can't come to the jail. Now the prosecutor's office is overwhelmed with caseload.
A couple of years ago, the vast majority of the Seattle City Council pledged to defund SPD. Do you feel like you're being supported now by some of those council members who've had an about face, and what exactly do they need to say at this point to regain your trust?
Well, that's part of this press conference today, is to talk about how do we dig out of the defunding in the last 2 years. We've seen how it's impacted our staffing, how it's not just Seattle Police, but it's the Corrections Guild, the jail, it's also the county. All this stuff impacts not just our region, but it goes even into Olympia and then statewide. The goal of a labor union is to advocate for your members' hours, wages, and working conditions. And you have to galvanize support for a fair labor contract. And that's the political lane we find ourselves in. I feel, to answer your question more succinctly, the political winds are changing because slowly but surely, we're seeing how staffing is impacting politically the people that are elected into office. The job of a labor union is to now work on relationships to get the proper votes for a fair contract. And that's part of the staffing shortage we find ourselves in moving forward. How do you do that with some of the council members that you mentioned that voted to defund us? As we come into the election years, the next year, we're going to see them pivot politically to be more supportive of public safety, because they have to come across as being more moderate to the reasonable communities that actually vote, particularly when you focus on public safety. And as bad as public safety is right now, they have to pivot. Like I said, we have 350 people eligible to retire right now as we speak. I can't absorb even losing 20 to 30 more people. So we hope our elected officials listen to this campaign, which is engaging our communities across the region, and understand that it's not politics as usual. This is an emergent situation, and it takes leadership. We're showing the leadership. We hope it's met at the same level from the other side.
Mike, are there any elected officials you want to call out by name right now?
No, I don't think look, we need to have a working relationship to improve public safety. Anything more divisive is a detriment and a negative impact to our public safety. This is about trying to galvanize public positive support around one candidate from over 2,000 public safety officers. We are the subject matter experts when it comes to crime, keeping people safe in their homes. What we're doing is highlighting that it's going to take somebody in higher office to assist us with our representation to our communities at a political level who can make decisions that will remove politics from public safety and absolutely advocate moderately and reasonably to our communities, removing politics out of public safety. And that's Jim Farrell.
Right, everybody's still working out a contract with the city. Are there any retention?
Yeah, so we're actively negotiating right now. I won't get into contract details, but to me, that's positive. Especially in a city that voted to defund us, we're actually negotiating with our political leaders that are elected into office. And as I said, the political winds are shifting, but it has to come faster because we're losing more people every day. We can't absorb any more losses. Say that again? Yeah, I'm not going to get into details of what we're negotiating.
Can you tell me how many times you sat across the table from city officials, elected city officials?
In terms of contract negotiations, I would say over a dozen times from the elected side in the past 6 months.
Can you give me an idea of what your response times are to, when you get a 911 call of an emergent nature? Can you give me an idea of what your response times are?
Sure, priority one for the Seattle Police, and I'm not a spokesperson for the Seattle Police Department, I'm the union head. I don't speak on behalf of the department. I would tell you to go talk to public affairs for the proper numbers, but it's my understanding based upon what I've reported and said that our priority one response, which is the most emergent situation, you can call 911 to get a police response to intervene. We're hedging around 15 minutes to 20 minutes response times. And to me, that's absolutely unacceptable.
So if there's a shooting, it takes 15 minutes for your people to get on the scene?
Well, that's an active shooting. Depends upon if you have people available. I'll give you an example that just happened last week. So there was a priority one call up in the North Precinct, domestic violence situation. As you know, Mike, that's the most dangerous situation for not only the victims, but police officers. They had nobody to answer that priority one call in the North Precinct. What they had to do was reach all the way down to the South Precinct, as you know how far it is from 145th all the way down to the Rainier Valley to get a patrol response during the day. It was going to take well over an hour to try to get police officers to answer that priority one call from the complete opposite end of the city. That's an example. To me, that's unacceptable. So we're seeing a rise in shootings. The month of August saw a record rate of, sadly, how many homicides occurred in this city. And the crime continues to rise, and we have lack of resources to address those crimes.
Mayor Jim, if you do become the next King County Council, how are you going to deal with the judges that continue to release these repeat offenders?
Well, the prosecutor's office does have some tools. Number one, if you've got certain judges that are routinely releasing people or setting incredibly low bail, inappropriately low bail, in future cases, the prosecutor's office can issue what's referred to as an affidavit of prejudice, saying we're not going to accept this particular judge. Now, that has been a disfavored practice because these are elected officials, but if you've got really certain judges that are just routinely letting people out or with low bail, you've got to exercise that discretion. So that ability is there. But I also think that, I've handled hundreds, if not thousands, of first appearances, bail arguments. We need to make sure that the prosecutors, the frontline prosecutors, come well armed with good arguments and really insist on the bail and make sure you make your best possible case, because you only get one bite at the apple in front of that judge. But if you've got judges that aren't really getting the job done, you do have that ability to issue an affidavit of prejudice on those particular cases.
My understanding is most of these cases have been filed, they're just waiting.
Right, it's a bandwidth issue. That's what I was referring to either. They while they've been filed, they're sort of sitting in stasis, and they need to be moved through the process much faster.
The prosecutor's office doesn't really have the ability to move them through the system fast. There's a bottleneck at the court system, is that right?
No, actually, the prosecutor's office does have the ability to advocate for these pro tem judges and go up to the 12th floor and have a plan on how to move these cases through. And what they need to do is have a sense of urgency. They need to set a specialized unit to be able to push these cases through. You've got 180 murders, more than that, and 500 sexual assault cases, and they need to move through the system fast. And it's not acceptable just to allow these cases to languish. There needs to be a sense of urgency, and there is none.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Tacoma has a plan where they're trying, this would be part of the community plan, getting more units, in troubled areas, having the lights on to deter crime. Would we have the resources here to do something like that, to keep the bad guys away?
There's always resources for this. This is a matter of priorities. This is a matter of making sure that we've got people in key positions that advocate for safety. One of the things I noticed when I talking about the different parts of the town the city I've been in here, is just a lack of officers, a lack of the ability to be present. And you just need to make sure you've got officers rolling through the neighborhood or being present. So you really do need those numbers, and it's just a matter of priorities. Government, in the city of Federal Way, we had a horrible homicide that occurred, last fall, and I just put my foot down and said, we need 13 more officers, and we found a funding source for it. We found the officers that we're doing, and we just made up our mind it's a priority. That really is what it takes. It's about the will to get this accomplished.
Would it be okay if everybody spoke today, say the first and last name, spell it, and the title, please?
You bet. Jim Farrell, Mayor, Federal Way, candidate for King County Prosecutor.
Dennis Folk, I'm the president of the King County Corrections Guild. F-O-L-K.
Mike Manzanares, M-A-N-S-A-N-A-R-E-Z. I'm the president of the King County Police Officers Guild.
Mike Solan, President of the Seattle Police Officers Guild, S-O-L-A-N. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you for your time. Happy to answer any more questions offline if you'd like. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
What kinds of, are you going to be doing more community activities in support of?
Possibly. That's a good question. It's going to be part of our broader coalition effort to reach out to the community.
Hi, how are you?